Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava, page 86a, on the top of the page with the words Chayav B'chulan, is liable to pay all the 5 types of indemnity. The Gemara explains in this case of one who injured his parent but did not bruise him, what are the circumstances? Is it not a case where he struck him on his hand and it will eventually return to its original health? And with regard to this case that Mishnah teaches, he is liable to pay all the 5 types of indemnity. If so, this resolves Rabba's dilemma. The sages object and say, here we are dealing with a case where he deafened his parent by striking him, but he did not bruise him. Since his father's hearing loss is permanent, he is liable to pay all 5 types of indemnity, and this is not relevant to Rabba's dilemma. The Gemara objects, but doesn't Rabba himself say one who deafens his father is executed? Even though no bruise is visible, because it is impossible for deafening to occur without a bruise? Is it certain that a drop of blood fell into his ear from the blow, even if it is not visible from the outside? Rather, it must be that we are dealing with a case where he shaved his father's hair without causing a bruise. In a case where he shaved him, his hair will return, and this is an example of our dilemma, that is, of an injury to a limb that will return to its original health. If so, this resolves Rabba's dilemma. The sages object and say, it is possible that here we are dealing with a case where he smeared his father with a depilatory agent, nasha, that caused his hair to fall out, and so that his hair will not return. The Gemara explains how one could be liable for each of the 5 types of indemnity by smearing a depilatory agent. The father experiences pain in a case where he has fissures on his head and he has pain from those fissures. He incurs medical costs because he requires healing for the fissures. He incurs loss of livelihood in a case where he would dance in taverns to earn money. I'm sorry, I can't even... He incurs loss of livelihood in a case where he would dance in taverns to earn money, which requires him to make various gestures with his head and his hair while dancing. And now he cannot do that. He cannot gesture because of those fissures on his head. He experiences humiliation because there is no humiliation greater than losing one's hair. The Gemara comments, and the matter that is a dilemma for Rabba is obvious to Abaya on this side of the dilemma and to Rava on that side of the dilemma. They each resolved the dilemma with opposing conclusions. As it was stated, if one struck another on his hand and the hand was weakened, but it will ultimately return to its original health, Abaya says, he gives him compensation for his major loss of livelihood. In other words, the decrease of his value due to his temporary paralysis, as measured by his price on the slave market, and his minor loss of livelihood, that is the money he would have earned while idle during his recovery. And Rava says he gives him only the value of his loss of livelihood for each and every day, and he does not give him the full value of his hand. The Gemara presents another dispute between Abai and Rava. It was stated, with regard to one who severs the hand of a Hebrew slave who belongs to another, Abai says he gives compensation for the major loss of livelihood to the slave, and the compensation for the minor loss of livelihood to the master. Rava says all the compensation shall be given to the slave, and land shall be purchased with the money. And the master garners the profits from the land for the duration of the slave's term of slavery. The Gemara comments, it is obvious that if one injured a slave and thereby reduced the slave's value for the slave himself, but he did not reduce the slave's value for his master, the Gemara interjects, what are the circumstances where this is possible? This is possible in a case where he split the tip of his ear or the tip of his nostril, which does not impact the slave's ability to perform labor. The Gemara returns to continue the statement. In such a case, all of the compensation goes to the slave himself. If the injury reduced the slave's value for his master, then this is the case of the dispute of Abaye and Rava. The Mishnah teaches how is payment for humiliation assessed. It all depends on the stature of the one who humiliates the other and the one who is humiliated. The Gemara asks, whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah? It is not the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and it is not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, it is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. These opinions, as we learned in a Braita, and in all those cases of Jews who are humiliated, regardless of their individual stature, they are viewed as though they were free men who lost their property and were impoverished, and their humiliation is calculated according to this status, as they are the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all are of prominent lineage. Humiliation is assessed according to a standard formula, regardless of who was humiliated. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says the court views each person according to his stature, the great person according to his greatness, and the small person according to his smallness. Rabbi Shimon says in a case of wealthy people, the court views them as though they were free men who lost their property. In a case of poor people, the court views them as the least among the poor. This lessens the payment of compensation for the one who caused humiliation. The Gemara explains whose opinion is expressed in the Mishnah. Now, if it is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, the Mishnah teaches, it all depends on the stature of the one who humiliates the other and the one who is humiliated. And Rabbi Meir holds in the Braita that all of those who are humiliated are considered alike to one another. And if it is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, a Mishnah teaches in 86b, one who humiliates a blind person is liable, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says in a Braita, a blind person does not have humiliation. Rather is the opinion expressed in the Mishnah, not that of Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara rejects this conclusion. You can even say that the Mishnah expresses the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said that a blind person does not have humiliation. He meant with regard to another taking compensation for humiliation for him. A blind person is not fully aware of what he does, and one can be rendered liable for causing humiliation if he intended to humiliate the other. But with regard to giving him compensation for humiliation, he is given compensation. The Gemara challenges this explanation of the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, but from the fact that the latter clause of that Mishnah teaches that one who humiliates a sleeping person is liable, but a sleeping person who humiliates another is exempt, and does not teach that a blind person who humiliates another is exempt. By inference, the Mishnah teaches that there is no difference in this way, and no difference that way. Whether a blind person humiliates another or is humiliated, the one who causes humiliation is liable, to pay compensation. Rather, it is clear that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara analyzes a related Braita in the light of the three opinions cited earlier. Who is the Tana who taught this Braita? As the sages taught, if one intended to humiliate a small man, and instead humiliated a great man, he gives the money he would have owed for the small man's humiliation to the great man. If one intended to humiliate a slave, and instead humiliated a free man, he gives the money he would have owed for the slave's humiliation to the free man. Whose opinion is this? It is not the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and not the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara explains why this is not in accordance with the opinion of any of these Tanaim. If it enters your mind to say that when the Braita is referring to a katan, a small one, it means that he is small in terms of his property, in other words, he's poor, and when the Braita is referring to a gadol, it means he is a great man in terms of property, meaning he's wealthy. If this Braita is stating the opinion of Rabbi Meir, doesn't he say in the Braita that all of those who are humiliated are considered similar to one another? And if it is stating the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, doesn't he say slaves have no humiliation? Whereas the Braita discusses the compensation owed to a slave. And if it is saying the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, doesn't he say if one intended to humiliate this one and instead of humiliate that one, he's exempt? The Gemara explains Rabbi Shimon's statement. What is the reason for exempting one who humiliated a person whom he did not intend to humiliate? The halacha of humiliation is like the halacha of killing. Just as in a case of killing, the murderer is not executed unless he intended to kill the victim specifically, as it is written, and he lies in wait for him and rises up against him, Deuteronomy 19:11, which means he is not liable unless he intended to kill him specifically. So too, in a case of humiliation, the one who humiliated is not liable unless he intended to humiliate him specifically as it is written, and she put forth her hand and took him by the genitals. Deuteronomy 25:11. This teaches that one is not liable for humiliation unless he intended to humiliate him specifically. The Gemara returns to analyzing the Braita. Actually, the Braita is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And when Rabbi Yehuda said slaves have no humiliation, he meant that one would not be liable to give them compensation for humiliation. But if the court needs to appraise compensation for the humiliation of others according to their humiliation, and thereby determine the compensation one owes to a free man when he intended to humiliate a slave, then we do appraise according to their humiliation. The Gemara presents an alternative explanation of the Braita. If you wish, say instead, you can even say that the Braita is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Do you maintain that when the Braita is referring to a gadol, it means he is great in terms of property, and when the Braita is referring to a katan, it means he is small in terms of property? No. Rather, when the Braita is referring to a gadol, it means he is an actual adult. And when the Braita is referring to a katan, it's referring to a minor, a katan. The Gemara asks, but is a minor subject to humiliation? The Gemara answers yes, as Rav Papa said. With regard to another halacha, the case involves a minor who has reached a stage in which, when others humiliate him, he feels humiliation. Here too,